All right, welcome back again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. So, did anything interesting happen while I was gone, Sam?
Yeah, we were closing in on the end of this election cycle. We've probably got this and one more episode. We'll be able to talk about it
Hmm.
before I already voted because I don't think there's a whole lot of new information that I'm going to get. I had
Yeah.
to do a lot of research on local stuff, but as far as the big stuff, none of this stuff's really going to change my mind anymore because I've already read the tax code uh, that they both propose, and I can tell you which one's going to destroy small businesses. And for those that know, I actually run a small business. So this is that's probably number one, no new wars, number two on me, and we know which direction certain candidates go on that from the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior. And I think we've got enough information on that. And then all the other stuff trickling down. And the sad thing to me is you've made this point and I've argued against it on a semantic level, but it is sad that the future of a lot of our troops, the future of our economy, and all of these things are hinging on the edge of abortion, which is why I wish the right would make a concerted effort to make it a non-issue. And I wish the left would quit voting specifically on it and destroying the country in the process. So
I'm not so sure it is an issue. I think it's
it
I
is with the people it's important to, and they're voting just for that,
well,
which is
but
why you
that's
can't
always
talk
been
to
the
them.
case.
Yeah.
It's always been a matter of how big a slice of the pie is that. Um and
Considering the swing vote might be young single women,
mhm.
it is a big slice of the pie, unless they're going to vote differently than they're saying. Unless they're saying something in public and they're actually going to go
Yeah, but
in
see, I've
and
talked about this and I've brought up the numbers. It that's not what actually lost the 2020 and 22 election because one, single women don't vote Republican anyway, and they didn't really vote in substantially large numbers. I think there was a slight bump in 2022 of the percentage of the percentage of the electorate that was single women.
but
And
what
you're
you
not
have to
going to win
account
those anyway.
for is it's the largest growing demographic.
Yes, it could be a bigger problem in the future. I don't know that it's that big a deal now.
Hmm.
And um, I was listening to a guy who runs an organization that is primarily focused on pro-life, as well as your kind of general standard conservative family values stuff. Anyway, and they are a grassroots organization, so they actually do door knocking. They actually do canvassing to
Hmm.
try and get the vote out. They're based in Iowa, but they do have branches elsewhere. And he was talking about what he's hearing back from his canvassers is that the economy and primarily housing prices are the biggest concern.
Hmm.
And they are overriding concern for people who are usually abortion voters one way or another.
Well,
The other int
the one
Go ahead.
problem with those two things is that that vote is being split more because people don't understand economics and they don't understand what actually constitutes the housing market. And so
Mhm.
they're falling for things like a free down payment allowance, a grant or whatever, or price caps in grocery stores. So they're actually
Yeah,
falling for those things because they just don't understand what actually goes into it.
yeah. And again, I think it's the same thing with the pro-life versus pro-abortion numbers of what that's going to be is how many people who are going to fall for it are going to vote versus so like the example he gave is that to some of the again this is anecdotal but it is on the ground evidence because these are canvassers trying to get out the vote, so they're talking to potential voters, and some of the people they're talking to recognize this $25,000 sounds like a lot unless you're actually in the market and you
Mhm.
know what housing prices are. Because $25,000 when a house that 4 years ago was $200,000 is now costing you $400,000,
Mhm.
that's not actually that much.
Yeah.
That's not actually going to help.
Yeah, I
And
remember when we bought this house, which is not $400,000 at the time. The bank still required I think it was like $85,000 down.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
you're still having to come up with $60,000 if things were the way they were in 2018, which they're
Hmm.
not.
Yep. Yep. So, and that's if you can find a house, because people that might be in the market to upgrade or to move, yeah, my housing value has doubled. Okay, but that also means any house I would potentially buy has doubled. So what does selling it now, not only does it not do me any good, because any house I'm going to buy, it's going to be a wash. I'm actually going to lose because interest rates have gone up so much.
Hmm.
So anyone who's
Yeah,
actually paying
we keep
attention,
getting the letters refi with us, and it's like you're not going to get me an interest rate close to what we got in
yeah,
2018.
not even close. Plus, then you have all the paperwork costs and the closing costs and all that goes along with it. No, I'm going to lose money, and I'm going to lose a lot if I refinance. So no, stop pestering me.
That was one of the most upsetting parts about when my truck got stolen, because
Mm,
I got into another one that was about the same price with, they gave me a nice settlement from the insurance company. So I was able to make a good down payment where it almost put me where I was when the vehicle got stolen, except we had a nice 1.7% interest rate on the old truck. But because interest rates had gone up so much, we're at eight something. So that exact
ouch.
same price hurts a lot more. And
Yeah. Um, there's an interesting uh kind of example of these economics that was one of my many observations from what I have confirmed having visited there is East Asian Texas. Korea is East Asian Texas because almost everybody knows how to shoot because they have universal conscription. They love their beef and they know how to cook it. They love their beer and they enjoy drinking it. And I don't know if you've seen these memes, but I've seen the memes and I've heard it firsthand from people of, observations of foreigners traveling in America. Why do you have so many flags everywhere? Because we're awesome. Yeehaw. And Texas is doubly so because you're going to have all those American flags, and wherever you see an American flag, there will be a Texas flag, and often there will just be a Texas flag. Okay, so yeehaw. There were flags everywhere. There were South Korean flags everywhere, and I loved it. You know, be proud of your country. Especially considering where you've come from. But one of the interesting economic facts of South Korea is where they have competition and where they have a very light touch from the government, it is very noticeable. So, for instance, my wife was annoying me and wouldn't let me get my new prescription filled. I got it done like 3 weeks before we left. He's like, no, we're going to be going soon, and everyone says that glasses are ridiculously cheap in South Korea. And I was initially kind of being a grumpy old man and scowling, but I did the math wrong in my head of what the exchange rate was, and she said, "No, that's not what it was." So just for my basic pair, because I have this obnoxious progressive prescription here, just for my basic pair, is around $300, and that's with insurance paying for part of the lens cost. Okay, to get this pair and my computer pair and sunglasses and get her a set of glasses was a little over $300. So not much more than what one pair would cost me at home, because you have a lot of competition because a lot of South Koreans need glasses, and you have a very light touch from the government. It's not something that's heavily regulated. Restaurants are another thing. There is a cafe, a bakery, a coffee shop, a restaurant on every freaking corner, multiples, because you have them stacked up on top of each other. Because there are so many, and because there's not a ton of regulation, it is literally cheaper for a lot of people to just go out to eat every meal than to make their own. It's kind of a trope in South Korean culture, and it's reflected in their media that young people don't know how to cook because they don't have to. You and I know how to cook because we have to.
mm-hmm.
That's when we were growing up, and then when we were on our own, we didn't have the money to go out to eat. It is more expensive, much more so even with fast food, than to just, how many different ways can I cook ramen and make it taste like something different? You have to learn how to cook. You don't there because it's not that much more expensive, or sometimes it's cheaper to just go out and have somebody else do the cooking for you. And so we would go out, and uh she met a group of her friends there that they've all been planning this for years because all they watch is Korean TV and all they listen to is Korean music. And for four or five of us, we would pick up we'd just take turns picking up the tab, and it was, for four or five of us, about what it would cost for me and my wife to go out on a date night, especially if drinks are involved, because then the bill starts going up pretty fast,
Mm-hmm.
even if you're buying whatever's on tap and on special that night. And yet, they still have a massive demographic problem, as I've talked about with Japan, and for the same reason, because it is really hard to live on your own because real estate prices are stupid.
Mm.
And you look at what Milei is doing in Argentina,
Oh,
and
did you
he
see the
just,
video from today where they just he banned their version of the IRS and all of the
yes,
people. What were they throwing? They were
I think they were throwing papers as part of, they're just throwing papers out, and I'm like, okay, bye. Well, bye. And it's, look what he is doing and how drastically and how quickly it has brought prices down, both rent and housing, mortgages down, by slashing price controls and slashing regulation that were holding back, that were limiting supply. So on
Mhm.
the one hand, you have certain things that are way cheaper in South Korea, way more competitive. And on the other hand, you still can't start a family because there's no place to live. And we're doing the same damn thing here.
Yeah. Well, and it's the reason what Malay is doing is working so well is one of the reasons I'm excited. Kennedy is on the staff for the person I voted for. If you don't know who that is, I did want to vote for the Constitutionalist Party just because, but they actually were supposed to be on the Texas ticket, but they were not.
Hmm.
So I don't know what went wrong there. As of just a few weeks ago, I thought they were supposed to be on there, but uh, because he believes in government regulation of for things like environmental stuff, but in a way that doesn't allow the government to profit from it, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
difference. EPA without corporate interference is different than EPA with a bunch of money flowing in from the people who work at the EPA. They're going to have a job at the other place that just gave them the money as soon as they retire. FDA is the same thing. That's the reason we had so much of a shit show this time around, because the FDA is funded by the companies they're supposed to regulate. And so that leads to crony regulation with the crony capitalism. Whereas if it's just, oh my gosh, we're like he cleaned up the Hudson River. If it's we're overfishing and doing this, well,
Mm-hmm.
actually, people in fishing industries want to stop overfishing because they want a job for a long time, right? It's the companies that come in and are crooked to try to get an advantage right off the bat that are the ones that need to be regulated, not the ones that are trying to do the right thing for their company and the people that they sell to. So yeah, it's a different form of regulation. It's a form that doesn't encourage bloat. It doesn't encourage the over-regulation in some ways just to give the company that's funding me an advantage. So somebody new over-regulation, big companies love over-regulation because it doesn't allow small companies to come in and compete.
Yep.
That's why the tax code that I read under Kamala's proposal is so bad. Because okay, yeah, we're gonna give you $6,000 to start a new business. By the way, I don't know what you can start for $6,000. Maybe you can buy into a multi-level marketing scheme or whatever. Uh, but I ran a very small gym, a box gym style, which is the cheapest model for it. And I think our initial just to get up and running was somewhere around 30,000. That's rock bottom. We barely got to where we were up and running.
Mm-hmm.
And that was many years ago when things were easier. So yeah, we're going to give you this. We're going to help you get started. But looking at the nickel and diming inside the tax code, yeah, there's not a direct increase on income tax for someone under $400,000 a year. That is a true statement. But there's 31 other lines to that
Mm-hmm.
tax code where taxes will go up, 8 of them for anybody, employees or business owners, the other 31 for any business owner. Great example, an easy example is the proposed 2% increase in Medicaid. If you look at your paycheck and you go down and you look at the line item taxes that are deducted from your check, one of them is Medicaid. It is around 0.7, 0.8% right now. The proposal puts it at 2.6%, which after negotiation probably going to end up somewhere in the middle. But everybody in the country is getting a 2% increase in tax because that's not when you get back when you file your tax return.
Mhm.
Medicaid is just in. It's not income tax.
So this is something I looked up recently, and I don't even remember what prompted it. Someone was saying something stupid on X, and it led me to this hilarious Vox article, who likes to pretend that they're just the news. The myth of the 70,000 page federal tax code. Okay. Um, and this is from, when was this? This is from 2017, so it's worse now. Um, the US tax code is definitely complicated at points, so it's no wonder that the claim that it is 70,000 pages long has become a widely cited factoid. Blah, blah, blah.
With
So what it
these
boils
articles
down
are, it's
to,
probably 69,699 or
no, no,
something.
no.
Yeah.
As of 2014, the tax code was only about 2,600 pages long. So there's their fact check, is that the tax code, the statute, is only about 2,600 pages long. Well, you go to the Tax Foundation, which, yes, they have an agenda. Their agenda is to drastically reduce the uh, the tax burden and complication, and they make the point that, yeah, the statute is only 2,600 pages, but here's the thing: the statutes and regulations. So this is why the IRS is such a great example of how we are not a constitutional republic, because you have the law, the legislature passed is, as they say, 2,652 pages. Okay. However, a tax practitioner who relies just on the tax statutes will go to jail because so much of federal tax law is in IRS regulations, revenue rulings, and other clarifications. Congress will set down a policy and leave it to the IRS to write all the rules to implement it. And that is with every bureaucratic agency. So they get their 70,000 number from all of those additional things that the IRS piles on to, okay, this is how we are going to implement and adjudicate these 2,600 and change pages of actual legislature. And that is with everything. That is why so much of Western economies are a mess, is because so many of them have done this with their tax codes, with their environmental codes, with their health and safety codes. I don't remember, was it Bjorn Lomborg? I'm trying to remember who I saw who did uh, a documentary. I don't remember if it was in 2012 or 2016 when Sanders was getting traction. May have been all the way back in 2008 when Sanders was getting traction and the Bernie Bros, and he kept using the Scandinavian model as a model of democratic socialism. And the Scandinavian countries were getting annoyed and saying, stop calling us socialists. We're not. And one of the examples that was used in this documentary is they went to, I don't remember if it was Sweden or Norway, and looked at, okay, well, they're not actually socialists. They just have a very large social safety net, a very large welfare system. And they looked into that, the pros and the cons of it, and what people thought about it. But then they went and they looked at startup businesses and how easy it was to start up a business there. And one of the examples they used was, I don't know if you've seen these, but inflatable bicycle helmets. It is a collar that you wear, and it senses a change in g-force and direction so that you're not wearing a bicycle helmet unless you fall down
So
and
it's
then it
like
pops up
it's
like
an
an airbag.
airbag. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. But they've managed to structure it in a way and create a forced kaboom so that it blows up and actually curls around your head. So almost like the styrofoam in Demolition Man,
I was just gonna bring that up. Dang
which
it.
has now become a documentary right up there with Idiocracy. Um, and they talked about how they can't sell these. They can't even test these in the US because the regulations are so strict and stupid on what a bicycle helmet is that it doesn't qualify. So they can't sell it. They can't even sell it as an alternative. No, because a bicycle or other such safety helmet headgear must conform to these regulations, which leaves no room for someone to come up with a totally new and innovative idea. No, no, it's just you're just tinkering around the edges of what a helmet already is.
Hmm. Yeah, and so to my point about why the billionaires love it, this whole we're going to tax the billionaires, they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do this, we're going to do that. That's why Elon is the exception to the rule because he's not trying to save money around this tax code. He's trying to help people that are innovative because he knows the most innovative people are business owners, that the startup people. And so back to that 2% Medicare, let's just take if that's the only one that increases your cost. Anybody who started a business from scratch, 2% is a big damn deal.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that comes in and nickel and dimes you, whether it's a fire code that you didn't expect something, the local the county tax on your actual structures inside your building, not the building itself. If you put in a new cabinet in that building, you're taxed on that. All of these little things, and then just across the board 2% increase in a specific tax. And remember, double that if you're a sole proprietor, because if you're getting paid on your paycheck, you're an employee, you're paying half. You're paying your 2%, but the employer has to match your 2% on Social Security and Medicare. So if you're a sole proprietor and your paycheck is your profits, then you're double taxed on that. You're double taxed on Social Security. You're double taxed on all of these other things. So, so that little 2%, I guarantee you, in the first 3 years I was open, maybe the first year was actually an anomaly because we were pretty dang good right out the bat, but then it got a little tougher when we had some unexpected expenses. And in those 2 years, 2% would have been the difference. It would have been closing or staying open for the continuing on. So yeah, this makes it harder for businesses to come up and compete. The billionaires love that because when you go out of business, they get your business. A mom and pop store, if they can't charge you reasonable prices, you're going to get everything from Amazon. It's way too convenient. It's way too cheap to get our stuff from China. Not to do talking points for certain politicians, but it does blow me away that 100-pound dumbbell is cheaper to get from
Yeah.
China than it is to get from Ohio. This thing that is 100 pounds, you have to put on a boat that has to carry the weight and then come off and be unloaded by somebody or a machine. And they're doing it in mass, or else it wouldn't be as cheap. So this thing that weighs more than almost any package you get is cheaper to get from across the world than it is to get from down the street. And that the people that run those things love that. They love the small guy being nickel and dimed. It just takes
Mm-hmm.
away their competition. They'll pay an extra billion in taxes, but they'll make 10 billion in profits.
Yeah. Apple and Microsoft know because it used to be them. IBM was it when it came to big tech. And then a couple of dudes started businesses in their garages and knocked them off the top perch twice in the case of Apple
Mm-hmm.
because it blew up and then they dang near declared bankruptcy. And then Jobs came back and said, I know how to make I know how to reinvent what I've already invented, which was the personal computing revolution. I know how to reinvent that and do something even better. And Gates did the same thing with basically stealing from Apple and from Xerox, because he basically stole the window idea from Apple, and he stole the two-button mouse idea from Xerox because they weren't doing anything with it, and said, "Boom, I know a way to make this easier for the average person." What a lot of people also don't know is that people think Google invented the big data siphoning. Windows has been doing it for 20 something years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's also where he comes in and doesn't want anyone else getting in the way of his big operations. Is, oh yeah, let's make it more and more complicated because I have a multi-billion, multi-trillion dollar company. We can absorb these costs.
Mm-hmm. Well,
You
and
can't.
that takes it to the second part. That was only taxes. So now
Mm,
let's look at price caps. And
mm,
here's what's going to happen with price caps. It's a short-term solution for many, many reasons, not just if you put the average grocery store makes a 1.6% profit on their products. So if you put a price cap on it, that is a dollar amount. So this is what they did not specify. They did not specify whether it's a total cost price cap or if it's a percentage over costs price cap, which is what they did
mm-hmm,
in insurance. So if it's a total cost cap, then the grocery store is going to go back in time and only pay certain things down the chain, distribution chain, all the way back to the farmer or whatever product it is. And that's going to cause a farmer revolution like we saw in Denmark and Belgium and all of these things. If it's a percentage cap, what's going to happen is these big mega chains are going to be able to have a 1% margin where your smaller stores are not going to be able to and sustain themselves. So you're gonna end up like Demolition Man, where Taco Bell is all restaurants, right?
mm-hmm.
So the price gap is going to narrow down the market, which are the people who are lobbying these people to do these things. So that way, once it comes down to three, they just encourage their distributors to raise the prices because 2% of $100 is less than 2% of $200. So if their cost for that product is $200, they make more money. So they start paying more to the distributor. They start paying more all the way down the chain. And all of these people are paying taxes back into the government, by the way. But and so they can raise the profit because their margin is a percentage. That's exactly what happened in healthcare. And so when the CARES Act came out and Obamacare and everything was going, what they did is they put a 3-year you can't charge more than this to these people, but after that you can charge whatever you want. And
Mm-hmm.
during those 3 years, those giant companies knocked all the smaller companies out of business, and now they had free license to raise everything back up. It's a short-term solution to a long-term problem. And here's what these politicians are doing. This is one of the downfalls. I still believe in term limits, but this is one of the downfalls of term limits because I'm going to get everybody treats Kamala like she's stupid. I'm going to treat her like she's a genius. She's saying this will get me elected. The ramifications from it won't happen until after my second election. And then I don't give a fuck about whoever comes after me.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we flip back and forth from Bush to Clinton to Bush to Obama, because they basically set something up for themselves to look good for that second election that crashes and burns. Obamacare, the other example, right? That crashes and burns sometime in the middle of theirs. They blame everybody else, but then the next party comes in and gets elected.
I want to say the number I remember is around 330,000. That was the Obamas' combined income on their income tax the last year they filed before they went into the White House. They're now billionaires.
Mm-hmm.
Having done what? Having created what? But they're now billionaires. How does that happen? Well,
It's
we know
speakers'
some of how it
fees. It's
happens.
speakers'
Yeah,
fees and book
exactly.
sales. Yeah.
Exactly.
All those
So we know
billionaire
some of
authors
how
out
that
there.
happens, but it's also, to your point, it tells you why they fight so viciously to get elected, and they don't care what happens after that because they just need a little bit of time to pad themselves so that they're set for life for doing what? Screwing the people and the country over.
So let's slightly pivot because I wanted to talk about the messaging in this election.
That
this
was
is
actually
and
my
that
next question. Yeah.
yeah, because that was all a big setup because those are the reasons I voted the way I did. But what we're getting in the messaging is so out of touch with that because we are being told you're voting a certain way because of this immutable uh,
Hmm.
characteristic you have. And, out of touch. I'm going to give you a small funny out of touch first. The messaging around the Dick Cheney backing the Harris campaign was this is going to bring in libertarians. You think, you really think that the most establishment of establishment figures that there is in the establishment, which is Dick Cheney, supporting you is bringing in libertarians? What do you think? Do you think libertarians are just ultra conservatives and that's all you know about them? That's the straw man they have in their head, I guess. I'm
Hmm.
like, libertarians, true libertarians, hate Dick Cheney more than they hate Kamala Harris. They hate Dick Cheney more than they hate Obama. Dick Cheney was like public enemy number one. And I don't know how true this is, but just as a funny note, it came across my Twitter and I haven't been able to fact check it yet. But apparently there was a we like guns too on the Democratic side, and they were shooting at a range, and a reporter got hit.
I've seen the pictures.
Speaking of
Yep.
Dick Cheney, if that turns out to be true, that is just
No, it is
epic.
absolutely true. And the pictures are hilarious because what happened is this was in Missouri, and the guy makes a big deal about being a former Marine. I think he was a JAG officer. Um, and they're shooting at steel targets that look like they're less than 10 meters away with rifles with scopes. Steel creates fragments that ricochet. And depending on how you have it set up, it's going to ricochet straight back at you if it doesn't have any give it in it. And that's what happened. And
So
it's
yeah,
even
Dick.
worse than that if you break down the pictures from like the gun nut people that have been doing it on X of, oh my gosh, this
See,
is awful.
I thought it had to be fake because it's just so. Dick Cheney joins a party and supports them, and then a reporter gets shot at a gun event. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's just too good.
I knew it
Okay,
wasn't fake when I saw the Babylon B headline. I was like, oh no, because they did a headline of Dick Cheney eager to join Democrat Party, knowing that you get to shoot people now, and I was like, okay, well that's the funny, but this is actually based on something because that's what the
yeah.
B
Well,
does, and that's
I
why they
think
had to
the
be shut
reporter was
down.
okay. I think, but from what I
It
saw,
it it hit him in the arm, but what was funny is the damage control, pun intended, from the Democrat candidate was they're the ones that put out these pictures and this comment about always make sure you have your first aid kit handy just in case. And it's like, this is not the win you think it is, bro.
okay.
I
So
mean, oh boy.
back to messaging. So
Yeah, speaking of
out of
messaging.
touch, the libertarians are completely out of touch. Out of touch. This is going to be the big one because I talked about the young female vote. Young men don't typically vote much. Young,
Yeah, I
young,
should
young
before I left, I pulled up the graphs and I showed
yeah.
the numbers that I think 2000 was the last. No, it may have been before that. I think 80 something was the last time men consistently outvoted women. And then I think there might have been a slight blip in 2000 or 2004 where men slightly edged out women, but then it went back down.
Yeah, they don't, they're typically unmotivated to do so, but you can only poke a bear so much. And I think in this election, the bear is going to vote with us after they spent so much time in the woods with the women. So, you can only poke a bear so much, but the messaging that was coming out, well, let Obama say it for me. Uh, for anybody who's seen this clip, whoa, what did I just do? Okay. For anybody who's seen this clip,
I think I know which one you're talking about.
this is Obama talking to a group
Oh, yeah.
of young men here. Oh, I didn't share with sound. Hold on. Let's go back out of that. Share. You. This is probably the rookie mistake we make most often, forgetting to share with sound.
If you don't mind. We have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout as we saw when I was running. That seems to be more pronounced with the brothers. So if you don't mind, just for a second, I'm going to speak to y'all directly. When you
The brothers.
have a choice that is this clear, on the one hand, you have somebody who grew up like you, knows you, went to college with you, understands the struggles.
Let's stop it there for a second, mostly for maybe copyright stuff, but also for another point. So this is a secondary point to it. This is, again, out of touch. There's a difference between middle class and working class. And Obama was upper middle class, but he's going, talk to your brothers, because he's talking to the working class black male. He's saying she did this like you. She did this like you. She did this like you. But in her own words, I grew up in a middle class family. She was not a working class family. She probably did not work at McDonald's. She was middle class or above. And in the last 40 years, one of the best things to be in this country when it comes to upward mobility is a middle class black woman. You have everything you need to move up in the world. But let's continue with Obama.
Pain and joy that comes from those experiences. Who's had to work harder and do more, overcome, and achieves the second highest office in the land, putting forward concrete proposals to directly address the things that are vital in our neighborhoods and our communities, from housing, cares about things like education. And you're thinking about sitting out? And you're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. I've got a problem with that, because part of it makes me think, and I'm speaking to men directly, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president.
The message. You're not doing this because you don't want a woman as president. That's the message they're pushing out. And I hear it. I hear it in school too, when I'm in class. Anything that comes up is, oh, we're not, men. Oh, I got the paper right here. Hold on. Listen to this. This is supposedly a scientific article here. An ambivalent alliance, hostile and benevolent sexism as complementary justifications for gender inequality. The gist of the paper: men that are mean to women, it's because they're threatened by the newfound power women are getting. When men are nice to women, they're also trying to hold women down because they're threatened by the power. Two things. It's a logical fallacy to imply motive on something where you have no evidence, but also this is one of those. Even John McWhorter did his list in his Substack at one point where it was social justice message, exact opposite social justice message, so you can't win. And he went down and did like a 30-point, the thing where it was, not accepting rap music is racist. White people listening to rap music is appropriation. It's that kind of stuff. It's the column A, you can't win, column B, you can't win, but there is no column C. So it's those kind of things, and it's trying to use shame to make men change their behavior. And here's another one from, I don't know the source here, but it was further up in this. Not only are they trying to use shame, but they're trying to use our
Hello, ladies. I'm
sexuality. Have you seen this one?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's good to be here.
Hey, Trey.
Hey, hey.
So, what do you do and how much do you make?
I work in finance, making six figures.
How tall are you?
6'5".
Okay. Do you work out?
I like to stay active, yeah.
Do you have a plan to vote?
I didn't plan on it.
As the redheaded libertarian says, first Obama tells black men they are sexist for not wanting Kamala as their president, and then Kamala tells them they won't get laid if they don't vote for her. This is what they think of you. Yes, this is what they think of us. The problem is I just listed two major economic issues. And we didn't even go into no foreign wars and all of the other things I really, really, really put high on my reasons for voting for somebody at that high of a level. But yet I'm being told that my main motivation is patriarchy, is the hegemonic male dominance. No, it's not. Give me Tulsi Gabbard any day, right?
Isn't it also interesting that they they're running the same playbook, but the photo negative, no pun intended this time, that they did with Hillary Clinton? Because with Hillary Clinton, it was a fait accompli. It was, we're finally breaking the glass ceiling. It was celebratory. Now it's accusatory. It is much, much more shame-based.
Mm-hmm. Which is by design, because this is the problem. These organizations that have basically taken over our education system, the typically more socialist leaning organizations that push equity and everything, they're also female driven. And I think that's actually been the problem with a female leader in this country, is realistically, as good as it sounds when the right person can give a good speech on it, like Cornel West is really great at this, democratic socialism, and he can fire up a crowd. Ultimately, it involves authoritarianism. If you could give me a socialist system that was truly benevolent and everybody could live their lives in peace, I would probably support it, but we're too big a damn country for that to work without you forcing people to do things. And if you force people to do things, you have to do it violently at some point. That's why I believe more in free markets. Free markets have volatility. Free markets have their own problems, especially when you get bad actors that kind of weasel their way in and manipulate people. But at the same time, everybody's free to make their own decisions, so you don't need to force anybody to do anything. You just have to identify those bad actors along the way. And the faster you can do that, the better. But yeah, but women support more equitable environments. So on the bell curve of what they're going to stand for, you're going to have a greater number that are going to accept that authoritarian measure in order to have things the way they quote unquote should be.
Which is interesting because, speaking of messaging, now that I'm back and I actually have to watch political ads again, because the only the only TV I watch is football, and coming up to the last couple of weeks, the football games are just smothered with political ads. I don't
I
like
think
it.
it's almost all of them right
Yeah,
now.
I don't like it, but it is clever that Ted Cruz's ads against his opponent for the Texas Senate race have almost all been about his opponent's all-red support for trans athletes in girls sports.
Yeah, I wish he
And
would spend more on the border with that, but yeah.
but I think that speaks to what you're talking about, which is the gender gap in voting, because notice what he's targeting. The words he's using is, it's not fair. That's going to speak to women and more effeminate men.
Mm-hmm.
And it is something, and you still get a little bit of the safety and security mom in some of the imagery he's using of video of some of these instances of, like, a girl literally getting her face crushed by a volleyball by some dude who's head and shoulders taller than everyone else on the court.
Mm-hmm.
She had to have reconstructive surgery, for crying out freaking loud. That's how hard he hit her in the face with a volleyball spike. So I think the imagery plus the terminology of fairness is perfectly crafted to target those voters. Question I had about messaging is, because I noticed this before I got back, because I'm sitting on the bed resting my back, flipping through channels. No, we just haven't insulted them enough, clearly.
Yeah. So
Yep.
this
Let's
is
tell
the
them
this
they
is the
can make without
message.
us.
Yeah.
But speaking of the messaging, I had to stop and go, wait, what? Halfway through my vacation when I'm channel surfing, looking for, Korean sports or cooking shows. And I accidentally come across either CNN or BBC International, and they're talking about Kamala doing an interview on Fox News with Brett Baer. And I said, what?
Now,
Why?
don't get us canceled. It's Kamala.
Yeah,
She even
whatever.
says, I think on her website, it's like she spells the word comma with a la.
Whatever. I don't
Yeah.
care.
Yeah,
I, I,
but
I get called
if we get canceled because we
I get called
yeah.
Keith all the time, and sometimes I get called Steve because apparently that's what people think I say when I say my name over the phone. It's weird. Um, how much play do you feel like that got in crossover appeal? Because just the fact that she did it made me go, do they think they're in trouble? Because why would she even do it? Let alone, how disastrous it was. Even before I saw any of the clips from it, I was like, why would she even do that? Her whole campaign has been limit exposure and only do very, very friendly media that is heavily scripted.
Yeah, well, but that strategy was starting to have her drop in the polls. It worked at first, but then she was dropping, so she went out and did the friendly interviews and she went back up in the polls. But then people were criticizing. I mean, the back and forth messaging has been pretty smart on both sides in a lot of ways, other than what I just pointed out. But it was you don't do any hostile media. And realistically, if we think of Fox News is like the Republicans what you're allowed to think. So it's still curated in itself. And I think her camp underestimated the fact that these news organizations are trying to do things to bring back some street cred.
Mm-hmm.
And even the organization might not have, even Fox News might not have
I
anticipated how aggressive he was going to be. But even still, he was the most aggressive interview she's had, but it wasn't. It was moderate at best.
Brett
It
Baer prides himself and wants to be a classical
Mhm.
journalist, a news guy, not an opinion guy. He's not Tucker, he's not O'Reilly. He is a news guy. So he is going to push, but he is also going to be tempered. He also considers himself to be you know, a tempered gentleman, in the vein of a Cronkite. And
Mhm.
so it's not like she was going to get blasted. She was just going to have to answer a follow-up for once in her life.
Yeah, I think it was a misread, and it was a misread that was actually shared by all camps because it was right before that interview. Trump was being interviewed, and he made the statement that he said, I think Brett Baer is going to be easy on her. And so all of the camps thought that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think just maybe he thought this was his shot to go down in infamy for the rest of his career on this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
If I do this, if I push really hard, then I'm going to have a legacy. If I give her a softball, I'm going to be just like everyone else that's ever interviewed her.
The other miscalculation, I think, and credit where it's due to the Trump campaign, I have been seeing more and more clips and suggestions of Trump in these long form. The most recent one I found is, oh, hey, cool. He was on with The Undertaker. I think his podcast is called 6 Feet Under, and I watched a little bit of that.
Did I not make
Um,
this prediction?
oh gosh, and that is such a New Republic headline. Trump cancels all his events in favor of one of the worst people ever. Donald
Um,
Trump will be sitting down with Joe Rogan.
Friday the 25th. We'll see if he gets all 3 hours with him, but
It is. I think you take like didn't we show some of the Theo Vaughn clips? Did we? I know we talked
uh
about it,
we
but I don't
talked
remember if we
about
showed
it.
any of the clips.
But I
But
told
you,
you while you were gone, he was on flagrant, excuse me, the flagrant
mm,
with
yeah, yeah.
the Kill Tony guys. Whatever why am I blanking on the name?
But you couple that where he can sit down and actually be more human with his McDonald's photo op, and that was just freaking brilliant.
Oh
It,
yeah, yeah.
especially when you look at how unlikable Kamala is in any sort of setting. And I'm going to be curious. I'm going to be curious what the results are and how fortified this election is.
Yeah, it's really tough if you go by the already initial early voting numbers. It's it's a landslide, but we haven't got to any mail-in stuff or any of that.
Mhm.
So
I'm that's something I've been going back and forth on is which do I trust more, voting same day in person or voting early?
well, since it counts the same for me, I just went ahead and it's
Mhm.
the way life has been in the last several years, it seems like if I put something off the last moment, something will come up that will make it
Yeah.
impossible. So I was like, I have this time between these two classes. Let me just go do it. Lines are going to be shorter. Not a whole lot's going to change my mind. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. The only thing I've got to look at is the stupid ballot issues and initiatives, because those you have to read carefully because they purposely like to try and trick you. And there are often these obnoxious double negatives that make you wonder, wait a minute, wait a minute.
yeah.
Does voting yes mean I support this, or does voting yes mean I'm voting down?
It's not even a
Because
double negative. It's like a quadruple
yeah, and
back somersault negative. Yeah.
that is done on purpose.
Hmm.
These abortion amendments have been like people freaked out. One of the first ones was in Ohio, which is not much of a swing state anymore, it's more of a red state. And it was pointed out that this was worded purposely to be confusing so that whether you were voting pro-abortion or pro-life, you thought you were voting your way.
Hmm.
It was done on purpose that way. And so that was one of those that was hard to read what that might have meant, because these ballot initiatives are so often worded stupidly. But also, I was being old and grumpy and like I don't want to, but the other side, the Dems are just so insane. I might just vote straight ticket. My wife said, no, you can't do that because, rightly so, voting voting a third party doesn't matter federally and probably doesn't matter state, but there are a lot of local offices where it could matter or that may be unaffiliated. So you need to
Yeah.
see
There
like
were there
a
were a
county
lot of
assessor, I think, is
yeah.
usually unaffiliated where we are.
There were a lot of libertarian judges on my ballot. Now we had no props on ours. It was all candidates.
We've got a lot of bond issues, and
Mm.
and it's really obnoxious the way they bundle those, the same way the legislature likes to bundle omnibus spending bills. So it's this school is old and needs a new roof. And oh yeah, we're also going to add 7 other things that are luxuries in this same bond issue. So if you vote it down, you don't want this elementary school to have a new roof. No, you a-holes. How about you just pull that out so we can vote on these separately?
Hmm.
Because I am absolutely voting down the ones that are bundled on general principle.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother episode if we want to talk about omnibus bills, but
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I've got another thought on the election that corresponds more to my observations while vacationing, but let's pause for a second here. All right, so jumping back to where I started with this conservative group that does on the ground canvassing. The other interesting thing he mentioned in this podcast when I was catching up on news was that the economy and housing prices, that's not a surprise. What was surprising is how many people were reporting on the houses, the doors they knocked on. People were so concerned about not foreign policy per se, but the world going to hell in a handbasket. And that it's not hard to compare and contrast. Pretty much the entire Biden term, we have felt like we are on the brink of World War III.
Hmm.
That was not the case under Trump. It is a clear contrast. And one of the things I saw, which then made me go, ooh, that's concerning. And then I get back and go, uh-oh, is I'm channel surfing. And like the first couple places we stayed, there weren't any English channels, except Korea has like a basically an English language PBS that's kind of their, hey, learn about Korea. We're cool. Um, and so I would pass by news channels and I could tell something was going on at the DMZ. Something was going on with the North just from the imagery I was watching, and some of it did not look good. And then later, when I happened to land on a it may have been ABC Australia or BBC, they were actually talking about what was going on, which was this, that since the end of the Korean War, there has been an official one state, two governments policy on both sides. And there has always been at least lip service to the idea of peaceful reunification. The current Kim has said, screw that. And he had already, a while ago, torn down a unification monument in Pyongyang. And what was happening these last couple of weeks, I think it started before I went to Korea and it was escalating while I was there, was he was blowing up roads. He was literally destroying the links. Now, these roads hadn't been used in forever, so far as I know, but they were there mostly symbolically as, hey, if we do actually achieve peaceful reunification, all we've got to do is tear down the fences and, the people can cross. And he is blowing up the roads and creating permanent physical barriers as a prelude to what is assumed that he is going to officially announce, we are two separate countries and there will be no peaceful reunification. That's concerning in and of itself, but then I get back home and I start looking through the news and I see, I don't remember if it was the new head of the EU or the new head of NATO saying that foreign fighters in eastern Ukraine would be a major escalation, which is diplomatic keywords for things are going to get even worse and it's already bad.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, there are numerous allegations that North Korean units are in eastern Ukraine. North Korea is essentially a vassal puppet of China. North Korea doesn't do anything that China doesn't approve of. So you are seeing the gears of World War III turning. This is Guns of August stuff. For anyone who doesn't know, is a famous book written about the prelude to World War I, how seemingly small things kept snowballing into the war that end all wars because none of the powers that be, none of the decision makers thought that it would get out of hand. They all thought we can control this and we can get what we want. So we can beat the drums of war, and Britain and France aren't going to intervene with Serbia. Yeah, Russia might, mobilize a little bit. They might puff up their chest, but it's Serbia. It's the Balkans. Nobody cares. And Austria-Hungary saw it as a way to carve out more direct influence in the Balkans. So everyone thought they could get what they want with a very limited amount, if any, actual fighting. And then millions of people end up dead. And Europe is just in tatters, especially Eastern and Southeastern Europe. And then Russia doesn't even exist. It becomes the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. So, but all of these arrogant elite technocrats thought we can manage this. We are smarter than the whole world. Things will not spin out of control. And my concern is that China, Iran, Russia are all looking at the upcoming US election saying, now is our time if we want to try and grab a piece of something before possibly Trump gets reelected. And I wonder how much of that is going to influence voters.
Now, you said North Korean troops in eastern Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
My first thought was, I'm not a specialist in Asian geography, but that's a long way. And I was a little wrong because I just looked at a map real quick. It's a long, long way through a lot of stuff. And so that's the concerning part If it was like a neighboring country where their people could have just moved through real quick, that would be one thing. But we've got not only mobilization but collusion involved with however this move took place.
Yeah. And I think that's why I think Hurricane Helene could be a straw that breaks the camel's back for a lot of people because it it incorporates so many of the things that people are dissatisfied with. Is you've already got a government that you think either doesn't care about you or actively dislikes you. You've got government that you think is incompetent and irresponsible. And so just on that, you look at the recovery efforts and how many people are saying there is no government help. It is all private. It is all volunteers and people who are flying their own helicopters and establishing their own clinics are being threatened by the government
Mhm.
that we will arrest you or fine you if you don't stop that.
And part of that's under the guise of what we started with, which is overregulation. Well, we can't
Mm-hmm.
distribute that because it didn't go through the vetting process.
Mm-hmm. It didn't go through our vendors. It didn't go through our regulations. And meanwhile, people are literally dying.
Yeah, that would
And
be
then you
like,
add on top of that the border chaos of, well, FEMA has no money because we've spent it all on asylum seekers and migrants.
yeah, and the argument there was, oh, that was a separate account anyways. And my counter argument to that was, why was there a separate account for that, and why was that account bigger than the one for
Mm-hmm.
natural disasters,
Mm-hmm.
which is your job?
And then you add on top of that the added foreign element of we have all this money we can spend on Ukraine and anyone else that we want to give military aid to. And Fort Bragg has one of the largest air forces in the world, and it's an army base because I believe the 82nd is based there, one of the Green Beret groups, and I'm pretty sure the Special Mission Force is based out of Bragg. They have a lot of helos and planes. And we knew where this hurricane was tracking well before. You could have very easily, if you gave a damn and were thinking about it, said, hey, be on standby because it requires presidential order because they are an active duty force, not a guard or reserve force. It requires a presidential order for the military to be able to act within the territory of the United States. But you could have set that up and been ready for that and had plenty of helos in the air to help with search and rescue. It took, I think, 2 weeks before anyone out of Bragg was able to help.
You know, all this talk about female compassion, and our president couldn't sign an order right away. I say that I made that composed that sentence on purpose because Jill Biden's running the cabinet meetings.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you know, Joe, I'd understand because he's a misogynist, patriarchal male. He just no compassion at all. But since Jill's running the show, you'd think she would have had some a little empathy for the people suffering.
I guess it was the wrong kind of people.
Yeah. No, that's like the talking to your kid, pick up your feet, pick up your feet, pick up your feet. All this time we've been yelling that quit sending our money to Ukraine, quit sending our money to Ukraine, quit sending our, and then all of a sudden they don't pick up their feet and they trip over a, piece of rug that's sticking up and bust their nose. And then they still refuse to pick up their feet. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, there you go. That's why you pick up your damn feet. Any parent would understand that analogy.
Well, I wanted to bring up that element of it because I was interested to hear that from on the ground canvassers. And I was, since one of our two-hole listeners is a dirty ferner, um, I'm wondering how the US election is playing elsewhere because when I did stop and watch some clips, not for long, because no, I'm on vacation. I don't want to deal with this. It was hysterical and disgusting how blatantly biased these foreign news, because one of the channels that I watched a little bit was ABC Australia and BBC International. And these foreign services were unabashedly biased, because it's one thing to, no, biased isn't the right word, propagandists, okay? Because if you're biased, you're going to say Orange Man bad because. If you're a propagandist, you're just going to say Orange Man bad. I
Mhm.
kept waiting for them to give me the reason. They never did. It was just him bad. He
Well,
did
and
this thing.
go further. If you're propagandist, you're going to say Orange Man bad, lie for a reason. Like, I mean, I've on our shared Twitter and on my own, I have Kamala and Kamala HQ on mine, and I don't know how many times over the last 2 months I've seen the words Project 2025.
Mm.
This thing
Oh my
that has,
gosh, yes. I saw it in a half dozen ads while I was watching football
Mhm.
on Sunday.
And this thing that it can be objectively proven to not be part of his platform
Mhm.
keeps getting brought forward. What was one of the big ones? The no, oh, this was one of my favorites after the presidential debate. No no U.S. troops are in foreign combat areas, and then you have a bunch of U.S. troops filming that, and then panning around to their desert or whatever tent, saying, "Then what the fuck are we doing here?
Mhm.
Are we not U.S. troops anymore, or are we not in a combat zone? Because the bullets say otherwise."
You know, it's kind of funny because one of the things I stopped and watched a little bit of, trying to get adjusted for the ludicrous time difference. I mean, I don't ever remember having jet lag issues, but I've never flown so far in one go. So like we've gone to Hawaii for anniversary trips. That's 5 or 6 hours. Germany was a long time ago, but that's also like 5 or 6 hours, and I was a lot younger then. The time difference between central US and Seoul is 14 hours. I mean, ahead, because you're crossing the international date line. And it took a few days to get adjusted on the way, there, and it's taken even more getting back. And I was warned that going east was even worse. But so can't sleep, flipping through the channels, and I stop on The Rock, which I haven't seen in forever. You
Yeah,
know,
except Isomorph
back
is saying right now, 14 hours, that's one side of my country to the
I
other.
know, I know. Whatever you do, don't go to Vladivostok, isomorphic. You'll never recover. Um, but uh my wife hadn't seen it in forever, and I was kind of chuckling, but also a little wistful, because that was back when Michael Bay made good cheese, like good solid Wisconsin sharp cheddar, not this funky French smelly cheese that he's been making lately. Because it is just an absurd movie, but it's so good and so much fun. But I think what made it work, the big thing that made it work, is Ed Harris is such a phenomenal actor, and you had such a relatable bad guy. Because I was having to explain to her, because it came into it in the middle of, remind me why he's doing this. And remember, the whole premise of The Rock was that Ed Harris was a brigadier, a one-star general who had spent his career in Force Recon, which is the special operators of the Marine Corps. And because so many of their actions had been unofficial, the men that died under his command were not given the recognition, the honors, and more importantly, the family benefits they were due for someone who was killed in combat. And that movie came out in the early 90s. We've been conducting a massive war on terror now for over 20 years. And so, how sleazy is it? And what are the ramifications? What are the actual practical ramifications? Because my concern is this just political rhetoric? Because you're not going to get fat checked, and you get to live in your own little bubble when you say there are no troops on foreign soil, there are no US troops engaged in whatever, when we know we have operators in Syria, we know we have operators in Jordan, we know um I'm pretty sure there's still a Green Beret group in Nigeria. There are still operators in the Philippines trying to help them with their southern terrorist problem. And those are just the things, those are just the ones we know about,
Hmm.
you know?
Well, no doubt we're down in Colombia and Panama still, and
It,
Panama, the
it,
Panama Canal is so important. There's no
yeah.
doubt we're still there.
Do the ships off the Horn of Africa not count that are getting shot at by the Houthis off of Yemen? Do they not count? Apparently not.
Well,
And,
that
and
was one
so
of the big things after the October 7th surprise, and then the downstream, the Houthis starting to fire on ships,
yeah.
and then the reports of, this soldier died here at this base, and there were a lot of people that were actually supposed to be in the know that were like, wait a minute, we still have bases there. These weren't the American public. These were people that were supposed to know about our involvements, and they're like, wait, that base was supposed to be closed, or that base should have been all Iraqi soldiers by now. That
Mhm.
we shouldn't have been operating there. How did one of our soldiers get killed there?
Yeah.
Time to clean house. And it's not the person on the top of the ticket that excites me about that. It's the people he brought in to do it.
Yes. Well, because he is so transactional
Hmm.
that the people he has chosen to surround himself with make me feel more comfortable and confident than going into his first administration.
Well, that's the difference between the first one and this one. The first one, he went in thinking he could do everything, and it would just work out as it the way he wanted. But this one, he went in with a team of people to already do the job.
Mhm.
So, so that's the big difference. We'll see what happens. Only so much can happen in 4 years, anyways. But it's definitely it's better than what's going to happen in 4 years if it's the other way around. That's for sure.
I literally cannot afford another 4 years like this.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, you use the word afford, but that's usually the first step to all the other bad things.
Mhm.
When people start getting strained and desperate, they start doing other stupid things.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, I got nothing else to ramble and rant about. Um,
Let me see if any of these other memes I had up were relevant. Oh, this one's funny. For those that are just listening, it's a picture of a weapon with covered in paper, and it says, "Make your guns totally invisible to the government by wrapping them in the Epstein client list." What was the other one? The one you sent me. Where's that at? There we go.
oh yeah.
Yeah, this would be a good thumbnail for today's episode, except I'm afraid, how it keeps cutting off the top.
The top won't, you would have to. The picture is great though,
Yeah.
if you want to add in your own text, down lower where it won't get cut off. But it's just Brett Bear with his eyes closed, just feeling the pain, and cackling Kamala lecturing him. And the text is my wife telling me what I did wrong in her dream.
Yeah, what I'm going to look for while this is rendering is a meme that's based on what we talked about, the
Mhm,
messaging, the "you're not a real man" or "you're not going to get
mhm.
laid" or anything like that. This one was funny because this one's funny because it was true. So again,
Yeah,
those just listening, this is a sign on a hospital that says, "Stop. Please do not enter our hospital if you are feeling unwell. Thank you for keeping us keeping all our people safe." I'm like,
your people are supposed to keep us safe and healthy. That's kind of the point of a hospital.
yeah, yeah. Here's a good one. You the guy was that Mad
Mad
Men.
Men. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's got the whiteboard up, and it says America, but the money you pay in taxes goes to help Americans. That's also relevant to our conversation today.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Oh, I remember the last little tidbit I wanted to share about my vacation that was really interesting. About how culture matters
hmm,
is now maybe it's different now because when I went to Japan to study, it was 20 years ago. So maybe things are different now. But one of the more interesting and frustrating things I encountered when I was in Japan, and I talked to Japanese people and foreigners who had been living and working and teaching in Japan, and they all said the same thing, which reinforced this thought I had, is that it is incredibly difficult to navigate in Japan if you don't know a fair amount of Japanese. And the the reason is because it is hard to get people speaking English to you. And it's not like a snooty Parisian kind of thing. That's not why they do it. As a young Japanese man explained, almost everybody takes some English in in school. So they almost everybody in Japan knows at least a little bit. But the way the culture is there, if they're not really sure what you said and how they're supposed to respond, they just won't.
That is hilarious because we've been talking about language in my cognitive class, and it's a very diverse group. And one of the people that spoke up, I don't know exactly where she's from, but I think it's a North African country that is Islamic in because she wears the head, but not the full hijab.
Mm-hmm.
But she also doesn't have a Persian look. She has more of a North African look. So I'm not exactly sure where she's from, but she made that exact same comment. We were talking about humor and culture and language and barriers on that. And one of the things she said is you actually, it is bad to not give an answer, even if it's wrong. So
Hmm.
that's in this isomorphics on here. He left the comment on one of our Wheel of Times, this educating Sam on living in a low trust society. And actually, my midterm, we had topics to choose from, and one of them was the core social uh, values and how they play into our social psychology. And the one I picked out of the five was trust, because it just interested me. And I was going through, and one of the phenomenon is in more individualist countries, trust is higher than in more collectivist countries where cooperation is higher. And I think of things like the Ash test, where they had the lines, and which line is long is equal to the first line, and they would have compatriots lie. They would say, "Oh, it's number three, number three, number three," when it was actually number two, and then it gets to the person being studied, and when three people said number three first, it'd say number three. And that's probably why trust is lower in these
Mm-hmm.
conformist societies, these cooperating societies, because you have to lie to get to the mean. Because everybody's
Well,
so different. The spectrum of personality is so big that you have to lie to be at the mean, unless you actually are at the mean, but we don't know who's at the mean.
that is what is so interesting about Korea. And I wonder if it is because for so much of their recent history, they have been the redheaded stepchild of East Asia being fought over between China and Japan. And then as a proxy for the Cold War between China and the Soviets and the US and their UN allies in the Korean War, they are not shy. And these they come from the same core, the same Confucian, Buddhist,
Mm-hmm.
influences that you have in China and Japan, and they are very different. So a Korean has no problem jumping in and saying, hey, do you need help with that? Hey, are you lost? And it doesn't matter how much English they speak. It doesn't matter if they don't speak any. They are perfectly willing and able to just point and gesture until you get the point.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, all right,
There,
on you
there are
go.
universals in language.
And I wanted to share this anecdote before leaving because I've always loved this from one of my favorite professors that unfortunately I didn't get to study under for very long, because his father's health declined and he moved back to Korea to help. But Dr. Park, my first East Asian studies professor and first academic advisor when I chose history, he loved to make fun of Americans in particular, Westerners in general, about how you think all Asians same. And the example he would use for how different they are is Japanese and Koreans. He would say, go stand on a busy street corner in Tokyo and wait for a traffic accident. There will be a lot of bowing, a lot of apologizing, and they will calmly and politely exchange information and then go on their way. Go wait on a busy street corner in Seoul. Wait for a traffic accident. There will be a lot of screaming, hand waving, and accusation. And if it's late at night when a lot of drinking has been happening, they might start throwing hands. I can attest that this is absolutely true. I I was thinking of Dr. Park the whole ride from the airport to our first hotel because that dude drove like a Texan but honked like a New Yorker. It
That's
was exhilarating, also terrifying.
Yeah, I was in my social last night, and it was a frustrating class because we were discussing papers like the one I brought up earlier, but also one of the things was prejudice in general, and old definitions, and just actually hashing out the definitions. So the technical part of the class, which I actually like, and she asked for her examples of what you brought from the table. And I went ahead and I take these risks in class every once in a while because I'm trying to make sure I get through this class with integrity. And I said, can I bring up an example of where you see what most people would be like, oh my God, it's so racist. But it actually was an in-group being bonding. And I'm like, I work with people that are in sports teams all the time. I work with, units in first responders and units in the military and all this. And you listen to them joke with each other, you would, if you had no other context than just hearing them talk to each other, you would be like, this is the most racist place I've ever been. But and that's level one of the whole little prejudice hierarchy. But then you go through 2 through 5, they don't do any of that. And they would kill another person that's outside of their team for doing that to their own.
Mm-hmm.
And back to the issue of trust and everything, and the independence versus collectivist, that builds trust. If you're willing to trust somebody to say, hey, I can say this to you and you can say it back to me, and I'm being open and honest with you that I have this stereotype that I know about and I may apply to you at some point, but at the same time, you're still my brother, the band of brothers thing. And if you don't ever do that, if you can't do that, if you're like, oh, these things are off limits to say, you actually start to lose trust because you don't know if they're telling you the truth. You don't know what they think. And so you trust them more to be there for you if you're willing to banter back and forth and be open with each other while you're in private. And the unfortunate part of that is when you get in an accident, you're more likely to say you're a fucking stupid ass driver, and and then go back and forth. Whereas, sometimes being polite is okay, and just getting through it and getting the information and getting the right story is good. So
All right. Well,
yeah.
that is all we have for today then. Hopefully we said something mildly interesting. My brain should be fully recovered by this weekend. We're gonna double up on some Wheel of Time to get back into it. So this weekend we should be able to finish the last battle chapter and then
Yeah, and I hope we can get through it in one, but there's so many perspective changes going through, and that makes it difficult. But we'll do our best to get through last battle, and then it's kind of clean up after that.
Yep. All right. We'll see y'all then.
All right, later.